Okay, and for part C, we're going to do f of x equals 2 times the secant of 4x. So first let's find our period. So we're going to do 2 pi divided by k, and our k value is going to be 4, and that comes from the 4 right in front of our x here. Okay, so then when we do 2 pi divided by 4, we'll get pi over 2. That's going to be our period. Okay, so now let's analyze the transformations of this graph. So because of this 2 here, this is going to be a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. Okay, so the 2 means you're going to have a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. This 4 here, anytime it's inside the parentheses, it's going to be a horizontal, either stretch or compression. Now you have to take the reciprocal. So if you see 4 here, the rule is you do the reciprocal, and that's going to be the factor. So it's a horizontal compression by a factor of 1/4. You did study that in Algebra 2. I'm not sure if you remember, but it was presented as 1 over b, and you have to take your value here and do the reciprocal. So that's why it's going to be a compression, because really it is going to be 1/4. Okay, so from there, let's talk about a few things that we know. Okay, so the first thing we can think about are the asymptotes. Now, asymptotes occur on the x-axis, so when you have the 4 inside here, it's a horizontal compression, which means it affects the x-axis. Therefore, it affects the positions of where the asymptotes are. So we know that on just the secant of x, the parent function, asymptotes occur every pi. Since we have the secant of 4x, they occur every pi over 4, which is your pi over your k value. So anytime you're trying to figure out where your asymptotes are going to occur, you can use pi over k. In this case, our k is 4, so they're going to occur every pi over 4. So that's going to help us when we go to label the graph. Okay, so let's talk about where the first asymptote is going to occur. Now, they occur every 4 pi, but let's find where the first one is. The first positive asymptote is always going to occur at the period divided by 4. So, like for the regular ones, it started at pi over 2, because if you do 2 pi divided by 4, right, then you're going to get pi over 2. So for this one, we have pi over 2 is our period. So pi over 2 divided by 4 is pi over 2 multiplied by 1/4. So pi over 8, that's where the first asymptote is going to be on the graph. Now, why is that helpful? Well, you can start with your first asymptote at pi over 8, and then from there, you can keep going pi over 4 units, and you know that's where your asymptote is going to be. So because your asymptote occurs every pi over 8 units, what you can do is you can label your graph by pi over 8. Okay, so that would be something that we could actually start to do right now. Okay, so I'm going to start at pi over 8. So this is 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8, which 2 pi over 8 is going to be pi over 4. Okay, 3 pi over 8, 4 pi over 8, which is pi over 2. 5 pi over 8, 6 pi over 8, which is going to be 3 pi over 4. 7 pi over 8, 8 pi over 8, which is going to be pi. All right, and it's perfectly fine if you want to label every other one. It's just nice to have your first unit here. But if you want to just label here as negative pi over 4, that's fine. And then you go 2. So this would be negative pi over 2, and then negative 3 pi over 4, and then negative pi. Okay, and again, we decided to do that because we have our asymptotes, which are occurring at pi over 8. And if you want to go ahead and put those in now, you can. So here's going to be our first one at pi over 8. And then remember, those are going to be with dashed lines. Now, they occur every pi over 4. So if 1 unit is pi over 8, 2 units are pi over 4. So that means I can just count every 2 units, 1, 2, and then that's where my asymptote's going to be. All right, and then you're going to continue to do that. 1, 2, here's where my asymptote's going to be. 1, 2, here's where my asymptote's going to be. Now you can see you're getting a lot of asymptotes here, and that's because we're doing a horizontal compression. So if it's compressing it, it's pushing it together. So we're going to be getting more graphs. All right, so again, we're just continuing to do the 2 units, and that's where our asymptotes are going to be. And then we know that in between there, we're going to have the vertices of our parabolas. All right, and then we'll talk about how to find those next. Okay, so now let's make a table for our equation, y equals 2 secant of 4x. So a really easy point to plug in is going to be 0. It's also a good choice because in between your asymptotes, you have negative pi over 8 and pi over 8, and 0 is going to be between them. So we know that something is going to definitely happen in between these two. So 0 is a good value to plug in. Now when you plug it in, all you're doing is evaluating 2 times the secant of 0, because 4 times 0 is 0. So remember, the secant of 0 is 1 over the cosine value. So if you go to 0, the cosine value is going to be 1, so the reciprocal is also going to be 1. And then 2 times 1 will be 2, so our point is going to be 0, 2. Now another good value, we'll talk about why this is a good value, but it's going to be pi over 2.